Thank you everyone for joining today on this discussion about Assembly Bill 2763, which is the MENA Inclusion Act, the Middle East or North African Inclusion Act, which will require all California entities that collect demographic or ancestry data to include a Middle Eastern or North African category. So today we're going to talk more about what this bill would mean for the MENA community here in California. And we've got a fantastic panel here today of folks who represent various communities that identify as MENA, Middle Eastern or North African. So we're looking forward to hearing from you all. To introduce myself, my name is Basha Jamil, and I am with the Council on American Islamic Relations. I am the policy manager for the LA chapter. We are the largest Muslim civil liberties organization in the country. And obviously a big chunk of the Muslim community identifies as MENA, Middle Eastern and North African. So that's why we are proud and happy to be working in this coalition with everyone here and really advancing this bill forward here in California. We have let's see, we have 5 panelists here today. I'm going to just do a quick run through of folks' bios. Maybe I'll start with Amin. So Amin Nash. Amin Nash is a current PhD candidate, no big deal, at Claremont Graduate University, where he focuses on the Arab and Muslim American experience. He works as a policy and research coordinator at the Arab American Civic Council, a nonprofit that advocates and empowers the Arab American community through civic engagement and direct actions. Outside of work, Amin enjoys adventuring and eating lots of Iraqi food. I love that bio. That's amazing. And then we'll go over to Sophia Arman. She is a scholar of Armenian American Studies, and she serves as the executive director of Armenian American Action Network, which is a national organization advancing Armenian American civil rights and immigrant rights. She is a descendant of genocide survivors, and she is a former, she's the scholar and fellow. Sorry, I'm just gonna gloss over a little bit. And her research, A People's History of Middle Eastern Americans and Race, from 1890 to 1930, explores the origins of racial categories on the U.S. Census for Middle Eastern peoples in the U.S. Wow, super impressive. Lots of knowledge there. And then we have Chris Habibi. He is the National Government Affairs and Advocacy Director for the American Arab Anti-Discrimination Committee, ADC. Chris is the son of 2 Palestinian immigrants, and he advocates for the issues that impact Arab American communities. He holds a master's degree in terrorism and homeland security policy. And last but not least, we have Kayvon Harris. He is an associate professor of sociology at the University of California, Los Angeles. He is the author of A Social Revolution, Politics and the Welfare State in Iran. Kayvon was born in southern Iran. He organized the first conference on the Iranian diaspora in global perspective at UCLA in 2023. He is currently researching the demographic and social impact of successive waves of Iranian migration to the United States. Welcome, everyone, to this panel. So let's get right into some questions here. I think we're going to first kind of talk about just sort of the origin story of this MENA inclusion bill, which essentially is the invisibility of the MENA community when it comes to collecting demographic data, and just what are we dealing with when we're dealing with this bill. If we can maybe have Amin and Sophia just kind of introduce us to this campaign. We'll start with Amin.
Thank you for the introduction, Basha, and thank you for everybody who have been able to join. And this is a wonderful campaign. I'm really happy to be in this panel with everybody who's some big thinkers and big hitters in our community. This campaign kind of came together. It was inspired by what's already been established as a Count MENA in campaign nationally. Nationally, there was already a movement set up to uh, include Middle East, North African populations within the census category. Um, the federal government was a little slow in establishing a MENA category. So California, us here in California, kind of took a step forward to try to advocate and try to include the population here in the state of California, specifically because we're the largest MENA population here in California. We're also the most diverse. One thing too is California, the UC system collects SWANA data. And SWANA data is it's a little different than the MENA data federally. It's more broad and it concludes much more populations, is more inclusive. And that's kind of where I met Sophia. I met Sophia at a SWANACon in UC Riverside. We came together and, she's kind of been a lead in this. And the campaign was really inspired by just the need and just us coming together as a community. I think at these SWANACons in UC Riverside, it really showed the physical aspect of when our communities come together and just what it looks like when we do come together and the beauty that comes from it. And we made sure that we continue that spirit. Sophia, she's been a great leader in in this, and when it comes to our population as a whole. So if you have some thoughts in it as well, how would we come together, and why was it something that we needed to do?
Thanks, Amin. Amin has been like a tireless and a humble leader of this entire bill effort and connecting our communities together. And so I really want to shout you out and really all of the organizations that are here. You all are incredible. I'm just very honored to be here. Well, thank you, Basha. I was gonna say, I think, piggybacking off of what Amin was saying is that we decided that for, maybe not just 20 years, but actually for decades and generations, right? We have been oftentimes within our communities always in reactionary mode. We're often having to play defense. And I want to mark this moment in many levels, both in this state, locally, and even nationally, as really important moments in history, right? Where we're seeing a turn towards civil rights coalitions within our own communities. And what's different, I think, about this effort than anything that's ever happened in California is we actually have by MENA people for MENA people, and our organizations decided to come together. I want to say that many of our organizations have come together in other ways, oftentimes under extreme distress, like, for example, when Trump's Muslim or travel ban or refugee ban, right, is coming together. And so this was built on very long-standing work that has been happening across these communities now. And I want to honor that because it is when you're in the trenches that you really develop these very deep relationships, right? That organizing needs to be able to push something like this bill. Lastly, I just want to add that we did formalize a coalition in the organizing of this bill across these various MENA constituency organizations, and that is historic. So we formed the California MENA Civil Rights Coalition. We came up with collective values and a mission statement around that about how we are going to uplift each other. We're going to uplift the most marginalized among us. We're going to provide the kind of, organizing that is looking at the future of California that we want, because we understand that while our representatives are, very important, that the power is within our communities and the people. And so I would just say that this came together with organizations deciding that they were going to take a we instead of an I or just one among us and actually uplift us all. And that is the power, just like the Asian American civil rights movement did in the 1960s, right? Just like Chicano, Latinx movements have done in the past. We are really at that pivotal moment. And so we should honor the things that we are doing here together, interethnic and interreligiously amongst these populations is huge, amazing, and historic work, and doesn't happen all the time. So I think people assume that it does, but it does not. And it's things like this that brings us together. So thank you.
Thank you, Sophia. I appreciate how you really emphasize just how much has gone into this over so many years, how much organizing has gone into this, and what a pivotal special moment this is now to really make this happen. Appreciate that. So, I mean, I'm wondering if we can start with just like a brief update on how the bill is doing and what the status is.
Yeah, so AB 2763, it was introduced back in February. And since then, I'll backtrack a little bit. We kind of met as a group, as a coalition back in like October, back in like November. And we have almost 9 core members in this organization, as well as more than 20 tier endorsing organizations. So it's a big group. But in February 15th, that's when the bill was introduced. And it's been, at first, it was kind of a slow start. We were a little nervous at first, but a lot of in the communities where we kept meeting with different legislators, and we kept telling the community here in California, and now it's flying through the committees. It just passed the first 2 policy committees, judiciary and public safety, and the next step, our next stop in the train is appropriations, and that's the fiscal committee, which means what the good news is that it's on the consent calendar, which means there's a unanimous vote. It should be unanimously voted across the committee members. But since it's on fiscal, that means we have to see what type of price tag the state expects to spend on this. And kind of the rummaging or the noise we kind of get through Sacramento is that this is a very favored bill. It's a very non-controversial bill, and it's looking good, to be honest. It's looking good. So that's kind of the status of the bill.
So much, Amin. Oh, go ahead.
I just want to mention too, the way, just for the audience and the way it works, the bill was introduced in the Assembly, and just like in the federal government, there's 2 chambers, the Assembly and the Senate. So first it goes to the Assembly, then it'll go through the Senate, and then the governor should sign it in August.
Thanks so much, Amin, for that overview. I'm going to turn it over now to Chris. Wondering if you could speak to the Arab American community demographics here in the state of California, and what are the needs of the Arab American community in California?
Thank you. Yeah, so as of the 2020 census, nationwide, they counted about 740,000 members of the MENA community. This was done through a write-in box, and they amalgamated a bunch of the different codes for the different communities. And of that 740, around 373,000 were located in California. So large majority of the population. Oftentimes, when on the national level, people talk about the Arab community, the MENA communities, they tend to focus on Dearborn. And while Dearborn does have a high concentration, in terms of sheer numbers, no one's going to be California. On what the community needs, I think this is one of the really important pieces about getting this recognition, getting us counted, is that we don't really know for certain with any quantitative backing what are the community needs. I've talked with health researchers investigating the disparities between our community and our communities and other communities. And the consistent refrain I hear is, hey, we need to use substandard identifiers, language spoken at home, country of origin, things that don't really give us the best sample. And so when it comes to, the direct services, it can span just run the gamut of the various things that we could possibly need. But having this recognition will allow us to really effectively advocate for those needs.
So much. Maybe just a little bit of a follow-up on that. If you could maybe touch on when there is that lack of like quantitative information, like you mentioned, what is the impact of that on direct services? Maybe what kinds of direct services have you seen that have an impact on?
Great question. Yeah. So in terms of the impact on the direct services, it really comes down to the funding. Because we don't have our own category or classification, it's really difficult for us to get funding that is directly for our community. We have to go and find other ways. I've spoken to groups in New York that they're women-owned businesses, they're women-owned services, which is phenomenal, and they use their platform as a woman-owned business to get contracts, to get access to funding streams that we would otherwise be boxed out of. So it really comes down to the funding.
Thank you. That's really helpful. And so I'm wondering if you could also speak to the history and the involvement of Arab American communities and organizations like yours, like ADC, on this issue. Maybe you can give a little bit of a background. Maybe we can actually start with Amin on this one, with Arab American Civic Council. Just how has the Arab American community been involved on this, and your organization in particular?
Well, on behalf of the AECC, we're newer than the ADC, and we were founded in 2011 by Rashad Dabagh, and he saw that Rashad at the time saw that there was a missing component when it came to the Arab American voice, and there was like a lot of misunderstanding. So he's founded the AECC just to specifically for voting and getting the community to learn their rights through civic engagement, and just telling them what's some ways to be civically engaged. When Rashad kind of started this work, he realized that there was like no language or there was no Arabic translations for the voting materials that he was handing out. And when he tried to do more digging and anything like that, he realized there was no category, there was no checkbox for the Arab American population. So that's kind of one of the crux of the Arab American population was, or the Arab American Civic Council was to represent the community, but also try to push for what would help the organization and what would help the community ultimately. It was to get our category, so that way we can get specific counts and we can be measured properly, and with proper measurements we'll have proper representation. But ADC has a longer history here in California, and they actually have a long presence. So Chris can talk about the Arab American population in detail as well.
Yeah, thank you. So ADC, we were founded in 1980 by former Senator James Abarezik. He was a Democrat from South Dakota, son of two Lebanese immigrants that came from Lebanon straight to the Pine Ridge Reservation. And when we were founded, among the first chapters were Orange County, LA, San Diego. And then in 1985, ADC was targeted by the Jewish Defense League. Series of bombings. Our offices in Boston, DC, and then Orange County were bombed. And the Orange County bombing actually ended up killing our Southern California regional director, Alex Ode. And that really galvanized the community. And to this day, our three Southern California chapters have been kind of the bedrock of all of the chapters nationwide. We can always count on them to be front and center whenever there's an issue that's important to them, to really be organized well. We have held a conference in Alex's honor every year since, I think, 1986, and that has gone on without break. So we really have been very fortunate to have the community members in California, in Southern California, and just their activism and their commitment to the community has been phenomenal.
Both. And then adding on to that, what are some of the challenges that your organizations have faced while you've been working on this issue, on the state level and the federal level? We'll go back to Amin.
Yeah, so because California itself uses federal definitions of race and ethnicity, and that's how California has always kind of defined communities and race and ethnicity. But California has taken steps forward California takes equal protection much more seriously than the rest of the nation. Unfortunately, it didn't really do that with the Middle East, North African population. It kind of left us in the dust, you could say, just because it took the definitions of the federal government. So, you know, it left the community. We have a very strong community here in California, and it's very durable. So the fact that like we weren't getting counted didn't stop the community from really progressing and contributing a lot to California. But the thing is, even we can see even with the new federal standard that the White House just announced a couple weeks ago, even that standard is still missing California's diverse ethnic population within the Middle Eastern North African population itself, and which makes it important for us here in California to really push on a state level recognition that can actually inform the federal level in the long run. So, you know, one of the biggest communities here in California that the federal level is missing out is Armenians. You know, you go to LA, you go to Glendale, you can't miss them, you know, and this is an important thing to us here in California, and we are a coalition, and you know we want to push for this to make sure that the diversity of our population is protected and also measured. So I think one of the challenges has always been relying on the federal government a little bit, and here we are on the state level trying to cater and tailor our policy to reflect the community level.
Thank you so much, Chris. I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, I mean that was a great description of the state, the challenges at the state level, and you know on the federal level, it's been what the Office of Management and Budget announced last month was the first time that they updated their standards in almost 30 years. The last time that they updated their standards was 1997, and it has been there was a struggle in 1997 to try and get some form of Arab, MENA, something into those the minimum standards, and we weren't successful then. And then it's been just a fight tooth and nail with every possible federal agency, with state agencies. You know, I remember having conversations on the state level where I would talk to a legislator about the need to recognize our community, and they'd look at me like, "Oh, of course, well, that makes perfect sense. Like, why hasn't that happened yet?" And I'd have to look back at them and be like, "Well, this is your opportunity to do just that." We were very good at describing our community, the challenges our community faces, the discrimination our community faces. But it never translated into action on the federal level. And like Amin said, most, if not every state, follows the federal classifications. And that's somewhat by design. In order to receive federal funding, you have to provide the federal government the data in a way that the federal government recognizes. But as I always used to say, those were the minimum standards. You didn't need to only follow those. You could do the right thing and recognize the community. And so it was almost like pulling teeth at times. And you know, we're happy we have a foothold with the MENA box now from OMB. But you know, we're still going to be fighting to really refine it and make it better. You know, like Amin said, the diversity of our communities nationwide isn't represented, and I think that California is a microcosm of the nationwide diversity, and so we want to make sure that you know we start counting our communities and we can count them accurately.
You both for that really helpful background on the history of this issue and just the challenges that you have been working on for such a long time. I'm going to turn it over to Sophia to kind of give us the perspective from the Armenian community. Sophia, what can you speak to with regards to the Armenian American community's presence and their role in California? And what does this issue mean to them? What are their unique needs? And please feel free to provide a background on Armenian Action Network as well.
Thanks so much, Basha. Yeah, so I mean, I think what's exciting about all of this is we're finally getting these checkboxes after so long, and you know they're in process. The federal one came a little bit earlier than actually expected. There is a lot of talk as to why, since this is obviously in a moment where a lot of MENA Americans feel deeply unheard, right, on a wide range of issues, but particularly what's going on in our homelands, right? And I say that because it's really important that we advocate for ourselves always, right? And we build power, and that's what this is about. Really, at the end of the day, why we want to check box, like so many of our wonderful colleagues have already said, is because it is quite literally about changing the material conditions of our people. Data drives policy. That's how this works in this country. And so as organizers, as community organizers, we need the data in our toolbox to be effective community organizers, to leverage that data so that we can build effective services, effective representation, and shift power, shift our foreign policies, shift our civil rights policy, right? Actually, literally reallocate resources within this country. And we know that based on this country's history, right, of its own really deeply entrenched racism, that anti-Middle Eastern racism has been core to how this country has been set up. And I think that's something that our community members know. I think they know about that because their invisibility, right, is another aspect of that. And so many people within all of our communities, when they look at these forms, do not see what they can check, right? They don't see themselves reflected. So for the Armenian American community, specifically in California, this is an incredible community. I just want to share, I mean, as both a member of that community, but also as a researcher, right, as a community organizer who's amongst so many amazing and wonderful organizations all the time. I mean, the Armenian community within California is actually very old. It began by Armenian genocide refugees to the United States, many of whom came here first and really faced the first forms of anti-Middle Eastern racism, and actually very specifically anti-Middle Eastern refugee racism, which you could recognize today, for example, most recently around how, for example, Syrian refugees, right, were often portrayed in media, right, or interacted with by the government. These are long-standing forms of discrimination, of systemic exclusion, of really just racism and oppression. And Armenians have not only been on the receiving end of that, they've also been organizing against it for a very long time here in California. And what I want to say is that in terms of our current demographics, we are a ginormous community within California. We are hundreds of thousands of people. There is a scholarly debate about if we hold the largest diaspora in the world. I believe we do, but there's a little bit of a debate on if we're one or two. But I also want to say, because I think there's a lot of ignorance around our community, which I don't fault per se, but I believe that the American education system, because they do not include histories of any of our communities, right, really does perpetuate these erasures, right? And what I want to convey here is that Armenian Americans themselves, by and large, are from across this region. So we're really unique because we are one of the transnational, right, indigenous communities of the MENA region, like lots of other communities. For example, Assyrians, right, are from multiple nation states, for example, across this whole region. So like my family, while people say, oh, where are you from? You're from Armenia. Do not realize that the Republic of Armenia is only 30 years old, right? About almost younger than I am. and Armenian Americans, though, as an identity, are over 100 years old, right? And our nation is very, very old. And we think of ourselves as a nation and always have. So we've never been limited by state borders. I think that's important for people to know, because what's important about when we do MENA organizing, right? And just like the SWANA movement, that was really a youth movement in California that helped get that SWANA checkbox on the UC system, is that we are also here to learn about each other's communities and not assume that we know everything about each other, because we don't. And that we might not even face the exact same things, just as people within a community do not face the exact same things, right? And lastly, I will just say this: amongst Armenian American organizations within California, but also nationally, are incredibly united on this issue. They unbelievably have supported the MENA checkbox efforts. Actually, if folks are not aware, in the 90s, when oftentimes Arab American organizations reference, that this has been like a over 30-year fight, right? Armenian Americans organizations and advocacy networks were part of those original efforts, actually, and still are till today. And so I come here on behalf of Armenian American Action Network, which is a civil rights organization for and by Armenian Americans, but I also come here on behalf of a coalition of over 30 Armenian American organizations who are endorsing this bill. And I think it shows the power of our community in uniting with other groups from the region to push our collective needs, right? And our collective power. So that's what I will say about that.
Amazing. Thank you, Sophia. I think you made a lot of really excellent points about, data is what drives policy, the erasure of so many of our communities. Yeah, I think that's all just very, very important. And folks touched on this a little bit already about, the recent federal category that was added, the MENA category, and I believe Amin and Chris both kind of touched on how it did not include Armenians under the MENA category. So I wanted to kind of get your perspective on that. Can you maybe talk a little bit about the significance of this update on the federal level about this MENA category being added to the 2030 census, and what that means for the MENA inclusion of a MENA category in California? Oh, am I freezing?
No, I see you. Perfect.
Okay.
Thank you so much. Sure. So, I mean, I think what's important to know is that the federal category is not going to be implemented for several years. And this announcement is very, very important. And not only Armenians, but also folks who are Black MENA communities, like folks who are Sudanese, right, have been left behind in this federal decision. And those communities are all actively organizing to be included in the federal category still, and are doing that very actively. And so I want to encourage folks, if they are Armenian or allies, who are interested in that work to join us, especially as an organization in our efforts to make sure that that federal is inclusive. But also on the statewide front, the bill itself is about making sure that all statewide agencies, right, put in the MENA categories and do so now. And I think that's really, really important, because it's also about us as communities who are directly affected here, right, getting our foot in the door, making sure that we are shaping what California's, right, government looks like for us. And also as a community effort, which I think is very, very powerful, right, that this bill came from community organizations, right? In partnership with Assemblymember Asali's office, we are actually taking hold of, this is what we want, not only our MENA checkbox to look like, but this is us, letting this state know, right, that we're coming for resources. We're coming for us to actually get that equality that we talk about all the time, often in our government, right? And this is a very real grassroots movement to do that. That is the beginning of that, is to actually advocate here in the state for those things. So I think for all of our organizations, it feels like this state bill is super important, because it is launching, it is the beginning of all of those efforts for here in the state. And that's a really, really important move and a very powerful moment.
Absolutely. Thank you, Sophia. I'm going to turn it over now to Kayvon to get his perspective. If Kayvon, if you could give a little bit of an overview of your research on Iranian American demographics and student demographics, and just a little bit of your research background.
All right. Hi. Thanks. And thanks for everybody and their great comments and passion on this panel. I've become interested in not just counting Iranians, and Iranians is a broader part of the Middle East, North Africa population of the United States, but also trying to understand the history of this, because I think that certainly in California, Iranians are one of the largest Middle Eastern communities by population. We think, of course, we're always 10 times as large as do most migrant groups in the United States, but that doesn't add up. You add all of it up. But nevertheless, it's made me more and more. I've lived here. I've only been in LA for about 8-9 years. The more and more I lived here, the less and less I've become convinced that the diaspora is one homogenous unit. In fact, there's so much wonderful variation in the biographies and trajectories of Iranians just into LA, not to mention the Inland Empire, Southern California, San Francisco, lots of Northern California, lots of other places that I became even more interested in. That while also getting the count, because there's power in numbers, and in America, the government listens to large groups, right? That's part of the politics of what is going on here, what you're hearing on the panel. But I'm also interested in all the different amazing variation among people that also see themselves as sharing linked origins and linked futures and faith. So, I mean, although the 2020 census, the US Census, didn't have a box for MENA, it had a lot more options to write in. And at least I would say that probably, maybe more educated, higher income, younger people were more likely to write in. But, the census told us that, over 3.5 million people identified as Middle Eastern and African in the census, either as MENA themselves in some box or some write-in, or in combination with another race. And the good thing about the U.S. Census, at least for recent decades, is they've allowed for multiracial, multi-ethnic self-identification. And I think that's incredibly important, because think about a 2030 census where we can first, check the box that we think best represents it, but check all the boxes. That's important because part of migration and diaspora is that mixing both within groups and between groups, right? So we don't know a lot about that, frankly, for second generation and third generation migrants, or the children of migrants, really, the children of people who came from the region, when it comes to marriage, educational outcomes, occupational outcomes, poverty rates, all a movement within the country. We just don't really know a lot about that. And that's something that we know more about, East Asian, Latin American populations, because of the ability of both the state level and the federal level to generate data about this. So that's just one of the very important reasons. We just don't know a lot about ourselves because of this, and about the history of our presence in the United States. Some of us trace ourselves back to the late 1890s, Assyrians, Armenians, Ottoman Christians, and some of us just got here, in the last couple of decades. And in California, because California is not only represented, but overrepresentative, I think, of many of these populations. That's why the data collection at the state level seems to be incredibly important. There's lots of things that states can do that the federal government, with its very high level categories, cannot. In the University of California system where I teach, because of demands by students, right, just like this is bottom-up demands, the University of California was forced to start counting the demographics of its admitted and enrolled students for the last decade or so. And if you take a look, about something like 5% of the enrolled, not just admitted, but enrolled students across the University of California system, which is the biggest, higher university system in the country, are SWANA of some sort. So Southwest Asian, North African, which includes Armenians in the UC classification. But think about, the huge diversity of MENA citizens in California. We learned from the census and from other surveys, although we're not still so sure about those numbers, they might be lower estimates, that, as Chris was saying, there's 700 so thousand, but probably a little bit more in California. And that doesn't include Armenians, because it's the US Census telling us that. And 26% of this MENA population, according to the census, is under 18. So think about, these are the people who are going to go to college, who are going to end up in the labor market, who are going to be demanding services from the state for lower income families, or higher, or middle income families as well. And so, I think that when we think about what were the real need for data, I totally echo Sophie's remarks, which is that sometimes people feel uncomfortable, putting themselves into a box. I'm a sociologist. I know that the box doesn't represent me. I'm complicated. I contain multitudes. But this is a political act, and it's a political act that follows upon previous generations' movements from the bottom up, whether African Americans, Hispanic Latino movement, the Chicano movement, and Asian American movement. These boxes were put on the census and on state data collection questionnaires and data collection efforts by movements from below, which is a very different thing than the US Census in the old days, which used to put categories on people from above. So the census is a very political document. It's not just a bunch of engineers and data tinkerers. It's a very political document, and it really represents what people want to see when the government just tries to see the population. So there's all kinds of downstream effects, I think, that people are watching right now who are younger, or maybe they have parents or grandparents who are older. And the thing that all kind of downstream effects from state level collection of data on all of the Middle Eastern categories that I think, I'd love for us to have a discussion about that. Because I think that, moving from the fact that, it's a box, great, now I can have a number, I can put it in my memory hole. I think we don't realize all the downstream effects that come from that we can learn from other communities whose activists and movements have made such demands and have forcefully made their claims onto the government, which otherwise would not listen. So I hope we could touch on that a bit more.
Yes, thank you. So I think you've definitely hit on like why having accurate data, accurate representation is so important. And you touched on why at the state level, it's even more granular and specific than at the federal level. And so it has an impact. I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about how the lack of an appropriate category for our community has held our communities back for a very long time. So in what ways has it held us back, not having a category?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, first, think about all the different ways in which numbers get used, like in the public sphere, in the media, and in like the hidden parts of the government that we just don't really see until it really affects you. So, I mean, for example, how do we know who's getting resources from the state when it comes to some things like language services in public hospitals, right? Who's taking advantage of educational programs that are made available for different languages? What kind of cases are filed when it comes to anti-discrimination? Mental health in the public sector, in public sector resources. Like, I think that, and some of the things that apply more towards low income and low resource households, some apply to people who are actually, quite well off that might need help or might want to be informed about it. And think about the ways in which state governments decide how to invest tax dollars publicly. They often have to decide, okay, well, we want to make sure that particular communities get some percentage of public dollars when it comes to infrastructural investment, housing, zoning, business development. This is, the kind of boxes that are available are what help determine where the dollars go. And then think about how politicians, decide what kind of policies to back when they're looking over their representative districts, right? What's the data that they have so that, either advocates can go to them and say, look at this, or they themselves with their strategy in their strategy sessions and, the ways that they want to get reelected, who are they appealing to when they talk about we, the Californians, or we, the residents of Los Angeles or Southern California. So political representation matters just because it enters into the mind of politicians. So I think all of those things, while we MENA, Middle Eastern Americans have gotten lip service from politicians for a long time, sometimes on the bad side, sometimes on the good side. I think it's kind of a fact of life in the United States that the numbers are part of the politics, and That's why. I mean, why would let's think about like the category of Asian American, which doesn't include us. Why would the Asian American category include, Vietnamese, Chinese, Taiwanese, and also Indian, right? It's a huge category. This is a pan-ethnic category. It's like a huge category, although as much as it excludes people. It's so huge that it's changed, the way that politicians think about, who they're supposed to represent and who they actually need to be in conversation with. So I think that those are all, at the risk of homogenizing and grouping everybody into the same category, which, it doesn't really happen, even if there's the box. And at the risk maybe of a minor discrimination against Middle Eastern Americans, because on average, maybe Middle Easterners would be claimed as high income, high education versus everyone else. But again, on average, the variation is actually very, very wide. And we don't know enough about that. I think that's a minor risk compared to the benefits that arguably would come if this information is used by the people who demanded it.
Thank you. I think that's really helpful to understand how the data, like you said, is political. The census is political, and not having that data just really impacts where public money goes and what kinds of investments are made in our communities. So thank you so much for that overview. I'm going to, let's see, I'm going to turn it over to Amin and Sophia. We've established at this point, why MENA inclusion is so important for all of our communities. But can you explain how you effectively organize the Count MENA in California coalition? And building on that, what advice would you give to student organizers? Maybe
Yeah.
Sophia, or I mean, go ahead. Yes.
So, Sophia, she touched on it earlier a lot, but I think it would be good for anybody watching or anybody who wants to organize to think about one approach that this coalition took. And one thing is, me, Sophia, and maybe a handful of other organizers felt that it would be best for the organization to have the mission and values set up front. And one of the missions and one of the values that we had was that this coalition will be built by Middle East, North African organizations that serve, are founded by, and they help the community. So it's grounded by us so that we know each other. And that was one of the first start, was just coming together and knowing what our values were, what our values are, and who do we serve, who do we want to help. So that was the initial step of the organization. And then you kind of want to start locating people that would align with you, locating people, and then we kind of decided that there should be organizations that have time and two, have capacity to perhaps work on the bill and give their opinions and be a part of the bill. People that have a lot of time, or not a lot of time, but they have the resources, because some organizations do have a lot of knowledge, but they don't have time to give their efforts every week. So that was the next part of organizing, was figuring out how do we spread time and how do we allocate resources, what's our capacity as organizations, and making sure that it's sustainable in that way. And then kind of, just making sure the community is always involved. I think one thing that we've been really successful here was communication, updating our communities, making sure everybody's always involved. And one big thing is to empower the population and making sure that, one of the core essences was make sure nobody's left behind. And one thing we always see is that many people from the Middle East, North African community tends to survive, and they need to step ahead. And some communities might not have as much equity or as much opportunity as others, but in this moment right now, we're making sure nobody's left behind. So being able to update everybody and communicate with people, and being able to bring them along. So I think, some good advice to have is, one, know your values, know what your mission is, who your audience is. Two, making sure organizations or anybody that's coming involved has capacity and has time to contribute. And three, sticking to your guns and, kind of pushing through the hardship, making sure people are always updated and in the loop. So I think those are the three ways we did it. And I don't know if Sophia wants to add anything on that.
So I first want to shout out, yeah, all of the members of the Count MENA in California campaign, all of the member organizations, the endorsers. I want to shout out the California MENA Civil Rights Coalition, which is steering this campaign. So Arab American Civic Council, National Network of Arab American Communities, NAC, Access California, Arab Cultural and Community Center, CARE California, National Iranian American Council, NIAC, Somali Family Services, ADC, who we have here, and then dozens and dozens of really amazing organizations across the state of California. And I think that just shows real power. I mean, if you talk about not only who we represent, but actually that our organizations themselves are actually the community members impacted, I think people assume that is happening in our government, and it is not in California, right? Our government in California is not reflective not only of our values, but even of our people. And so a lot of times, the question of representation, I think, gets brought up a lot, right? And people are like, well, does that really matter? Does it not really matter? And I have to say, as our communities' lives are on the line, including in our homelands, power by any means necessary at every level, from the community to the state to the national, literally means life or death. And I want to be very honest about it, because that's also the beauty of what social justice is and what fighting for civil rights is, right? We're in the business of actually preventing death in the future. And I know it seems sometimes like that might be hyperbolic, but it's not. Turn on the news. Look at what our communities are facing, right? People also aren't only coming here as immigrants within the MENA community, right? They've also been coming here as refugees. They've also been coming here from war and destruction and very real things for a very, very long time. And what we see time and time again, generation after generation, are these same systems that are impacting them, actually, regardless of group often. I mean, there's really patterns that people are facing, and that shows you what systemic racism does, what systemic erasure does. And so I'm going to say, because we do have young folks and students watching right now, that everything that has ever been in this country was built by somebody. And so the reality is that it is about deciding that we are not going to wait for anybody else. And especially in terms of Middle Eastern and North African people, to be honest, because there are so many experts on TV and people who want to give us social services, right, who don't come from our backgrounds at all, who don't understand actually what we're going through, in the same way that maybe actually your uncle does know more than the guy who's all the way up in power, to be honest, about your community. And to value that community history, to value that community knowledge that we already have within us. I think that is the most powerful thing of saying, not just for us, but by us. And I think that is the amazing thing when I have seen any of these kind of grassroots campaigns around these checkboxes. They're not just a checkbox. We're not just talking about identity. They're about that we are coming on behalf of thousands of other people. And we are thinking about ourselves as a collective, right? Future, as opposed to, I'm just going to be fine and keep my head down here and hope it works out for me. Lastly, I will just say this. The most effective way to organize, I have found in my own experience, and I know lots of people have different organizing theories or theories of change, is to really think about, what do our loved ones need? What do we need? And in the case of the Count MENA in California campaign and the checkboxes that have been happening actually now across the country in various forms, and is now all the way at the federal level, we started at those questions. What do we need? Healthcare, education, job access, right? Access to the arts and culture, right? Economic justice, right? We needed language access. I mean, this is huge, right? If somebody's coming to the census already and they don't speak your language, and your grandma, right, is struggling even to know how to fill out the form, right? There is a barrier to entry. If you think about voting rights in this country, they've never taken MENA voting rights in account anywhere, right? And other communities have fought for that. I'll give you a very, very specific example. recently in Los Angeles, for example, the both the city of LA and the assembly districts cut through very prominent Armenian neighborhoods, like sliced through them. And we know, right, historically to other communities, that is ways that they break down community power, is by not taking into account, for example, the voting rights of communities and where they live. And it's been actually a way to suppress people's votes, right, and suppress their power. So the most effective organizing is to think about, what do our loved ones need? What is the kind of world that we want to build? And I think being in that proactive way, rather than just thinking about, the oppression and how things are, but actually what we would want. What do we want to fight for, right? I want equitable healthcare for everybody I know, and I want it to be in every language from the MENA region. And we can demand that because that's what it takes. And that's the way things have been built. So it's actually just going for it and say, we're not waiting for anybody. The bus is not coming. We are the bus, right? That's what we are.
Thank you, Sophia. I think that it's also so much less exhausting to
Oh,
think about to think about what it is
Absolutely.
that you're creating and not just what you're pissed off by, right? And like you said, like community centered, care centered, just out of love for the community. I think that's really beautiful. And so thank you both for sharing on community organizing. And on that note, I wanted to also I know we're short on time or we're wrapping up pretty soon, but I wanted to turn it over to Chris. As a Palestinian American, as someone who has been working on, Arab American empowerment for so long, and just what we're seeing on campuses all over the country and the ways that, student organizers are being silenced. What advice do you have for student organizers that may be facing threats or maybe facing consequences for their organizing?
Yeah, I mean, as recently as today, we saw what was going on Columbia's campus. First, to hammer home the point that Sophia was making, the power and the passion that we have been seeing is incredible. To students that are facing disciplinary procedures, facing whatever it might be on your campuses, the top message is know that there is a wealth of resources to support you. You can always reach out to organizations like ADC, other advocacy organizations like Palestine Legal. We're more than happy. I mean, today I thought I was going to be doing one thing today and then spent most of my day responding to Columbia. So that's on the more strategic level. On the tactical level, practice good operational security. Know who is in your groups, know who you're sending messages to. The rule that I usually like to follow is, if I don't know if this should be sent over a text or an email, I'll just call. It's always better. And then the other kind of tactical piece of advice is document everything possible. Interactions, if possible, get other people to send things written over email, over text, whatever it might be. Everything can be used to help advocate for you, at least on our side. And never talk to cops.
Solid advice. Thank you, Chris. So we did get one question from folks that are watching. The question is, since the bill has gone through 2 committees, is this a good time to start calling our legislators to support the bill? I think maybe Amin might have the most up-to-date, so I'll turn it over to Amin.
Yeah, I mean, the bill, it's a good question. And the quick answer is, there's no wrong time to call your legislators. You can always call them and let them know you support the bill and you want to see it through. But now is a really good time to actually do call them, only because it's in appropriations. And essentially what happens in appropriations is kind of it goes behind a dark door. It goes behind a black door or a black hole. And we don't really know what happens, other than being able to communicate beforehand, before it goes through the door, that the community supports the bill. So one of the main things you can do is call the legislators, but also on the Count MENA In website, so the countmenainca.org, you'd be able to sign an action letter and send it out to automatically send it out to your legislator, and they'll go to their staff and they'll be able to read it. These letters, I want to really emphasize that they've been having a huge impact. There's been more than 4,050 letters sent so far since we sent it out, and almost every time we contact a legislator or somebody contacts us, it's been that they already kind of know about it, and their legislators are already aware of this bill. What they really need is to hear from the community. They see the community letters, but they would love to hear very specific experiences, and sometimes they still don't know the exact stories that your voice can tell and that your authentic self can tell. So that's, it is important to contact legislators, specifically the appropriations committee, if you can do that. But either way, if they can hear your stories and really hear those authentic experiences, that goes a long way.
You, Amin. We had another question actually come in. Are there groups who are actively opposing the adoption of a MENA category? And if so, what are some ways to address that opposition? Go ahead, Sophia.
I mean, everybody, knock on wood, however you observe your prayers or, your intentions, we actually have had a very, very supportive, loving community here in California. I think this has been a very a long time coming, and all of our work against anti-discrimination, for representation, right, against so many things over the past 10 years, 20 years, honestly, decades and generations really got us here. Opposition would come from people who are racist, and I want to name that out loud. Basha, can I say it? I'm going to say it because that would be, but we really actually here in California, I think we've built such effective community power over the years. I never would say out loud that we don't have opposition because I don't believe that. And I believe that at any moment, yeah, knock on wood, exactly. Chris is knocking on his head, so we got that good. But I would just say that actually legislators thus far have been incredibly supportive, and that's really exciting. One day, of course, we hope that the legislature is actually reflective of MENA communities, but having MENA allies up there is really, really great. So we want to thank every assembly member that has pledged their support, and we really need you to go to our countmenainca.org, again, letter, to send that coalition letter directly to their office. I really want to emphasize, because, sometimes it's like your uncle or your auntie or your grandpa, like they want to just, they just want to go on their own. They want to go rogue. That's still great. We still love it, but it's really effective when it comes from a collective voice too, right? And to say, I am coming not just on behalf of myself, right, but I'm coming in unison with thousands of other people from my community, and I really, really want you to get this done. I do also think, as Amin said, that having them hear your voice, or you coming with us to advocacy meetings, we are open for you to volunteer with us. We are here and ready, and just know we can hold that with you. You are welcome to be part of this movement. You are this movement. So please come reach out to us at countmenaInCalifornia.org. If you're interested in volunteering, organizing is about us together, and you are always welcome here.
You, Sophia. Before we wrap up, does anyone have any final thoughts on how we build momentum? How do we get this through the finish line? Anything that you want to add? Yes, go ahead, Chris.
So in terms of how to build momentum and kind of the power of these community-led efforts, in Michigan, they were redistricting the area around Detroit, which includes Dearborn. And initially, the maps that they drew had split Dearborn up into 3 separate districts, similar to what Sophia was saying about the Armenian community in LA. And using a similar tool, we had community members send in letters to the redistricting commission, and we had a couple thousand send in a letter, the same letter. And I mean, in the end, I think we ended up with just 1 district to cover Dearborn. So they are going to have a member of the Michigan House that represents them. So we know that there are successes, and this works. So don't lose hope. Take care of yourself. If you feel like you're losing steam, ask for help, but don't give up. And just we can and we will succeed here.
Wise
Can I
words.
add? Can I
Of
add
course.
something?
Yes,
Yeah,
please.
I think there was an overt push. There's no like super overt like pushback against this category. What was the question for a long time was, do people want this beyond essentially the louder, activist side? And we didn't know until we asked. And so, over the last maybe decade or so, there's been a lot of great research asking people what they wanted. Say, well, okay, well, what's your preference for what kind of boxes you wanted? And friend of mine, Neda Magbule, is a sociologist, Iranian sociologist in Canada. She and a team of researchers ran some very well-designed surveys in the United States where they gave one half of the survey group kind of just the normal census boxes with the write-in, and another half the census boxes with MENA on it, and then said, okay, so kind of an A/B test. The same type of demographic groups. Were people more likely to identify as MENA if the option was given explicitly on the form? This is how you're going to provide evidence to a skeptic. And something like 60 to 70% of people who would classify themselves as MENA like want put themselves down on the box. So it's not a minority of people. It convinced me, frankly. I was like, once I saw that, I was like, okay, this is like really good evidence. And that, by the way, was sent to the U.S. Census, to one of the pieces of research that advocated for the inclusion of the MENA box. So, I think that the groundswell is there. You can't just claim that it's a bunch of young people. It's actually people of all ages that want this and that feel represented by it. That's what the sense is. You should check the things that you feel represented by, including multiple things. And the other major category that many people are advocating for is multiracial, multi-ethnic selection. That's also huge and growing self-identified category in the United States. And we are that too. And that's actually important for understanding the connections between different demographic migrant groups. And so I should just say, Chris's point was amazing. In Los Angeles, the city council, each city council member in Los Angeles has more constituents than most US Congress people. And it's a crazy, political system where there's only a handful of them, and they hold so much power and represent so many people, and we know very little about the demographics of Middle Eastern populations across LA, other than just kind of, looking at Yelp at the restaurants. So I think this is incredibly important, and it would really give activists and community members tools to make demands on all levels of government.
I absolutely agree. Thank you. And that was very well said. Any final thoughts before we wrap it up? Yes.
It's one thing I can say is, for everybody watching, young, old, whoever, your voice is really, really important. And as Dr. Kayvon was saying earlier, you look at Yelp and you can see all of our restaurants, but fun fact is that we're not recognized where it matters most, which is data. And using your voice and being able to advocate for yourself, your voice is very important. And it's something that I think our community, the MENA community, can own up to at this moment and have pride in. Our voice is very powerful and it's very important. So being able to educate your community members, get other community members around you, your mom, your dad, your sister, all your entire community, get them activated, figure out ways to get involved. There's been some links sent on the chat, so any way you like for us to join the coalition, we'll help you. But also, you're part of the community. Advocate for yourself, advocate for who you are, because your voice is important, and your voice is important, and you yourself are important as well. So,
Thanks, Amin. I want to thank all of our panelists today for sharing their expertise and their passion for MENA inclusion. I think that this is such a exciting moment. Working at CARE, I am inundated all the time with horrible things that are happening to our communities, and I it feels like a bright light in all of that sort of negativity. So this is a good, you know, a great step forward for our community. And I'm looking forward to really moving it forward and building on this momentum and working as a community to get this through the finish line. Have a wonderful rest of your night, and I look forward to working with you all. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Basha.
Thank you so much. Good job.